How does the FIFA World Cup affect a country's economy? What's different about the 2026 USA-Canada-Mexico tournament? If you ask a politician, hosting the World Cup sounds like the easiest sales pitch in the world. More tourists, more jobs, more hotels booked, more restaurants packed, more global attention, more national pride. In that version of the story, the World Cup is basically a month-long money printer with fireworks. But if you ask economists, the answer gets a lot more interesting. Because the World Cup absolutely can boost an economy, just not always in the way people imagine, not always as much as promised, and definitely not without risk. And that is exactly why the 2026 tournament is so fascinating. It won't just be another World Cup. It will be the first one ever hosted by 3 countries, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and it will also be the biggest World Cup ever, with 48 teams, 104 matches, and 16 host cities across North America. The United States will host 11 of those cities, Mexico 3, and Canada 2. Mexico City will stage the opening match, and the final will be played at MetLife Stadium in the New York, New Jersey area. The U.S. will host the majority of the games, 78 inches total, while Canada and Mexico will host 13 each. Canada will host the men's tournament for the first time. Mexico will become the first country to host or co-host a men's World Cup 3 times, and the United States will be back as a host for the first time since 1994. So the big question is this: what does a World Cup actually do to a country's economy? And then, right after that, what changes when the event is split across 3 countries instead of just one? Here's the cleanest way to think about it. First, there's the obvious stuff, the short-term boost. This is the part everybody sees. Fans arrive, planes fill up, hotels get expensive, restaurants get slammed, bars stay packed, taxis, trains, merch stands, and street vendors all get busier. Temporary jobs appear in hospitality, transport, event operations, security, food service, and tourism. If a city gets several matches, it suddenly becomes part of a global travel circuit. For local businesses, that can feel like Christmas, New Year's Eve, and a Taylor Swift concert all happening at once. And yes, that effect is real. Big sporting events do create surges in visitor spending, especially from foreign fans, and they can generate a lot of excitement and commercial activity in the host cities. But here's the catch. Not every dollar spent during the World Cup is truly new money for the national economy. Some regular tourists avoid the host country because they assume it will be crowded, expensive, and chaotic. Economists call this crowding out. In other words, the football fan who flies in may replace the business traveler, the family vacationer, or the conference guest who decided to stay away. And local residents often don't actually increase total spending, they just redirect it. Instead of going to a movie or a mall, they buy match-related food, drinks, and merchandise. So the country gets a burst of football spending, but not every bit of it is extra growth. That's one reason research on past World Cups often finds that short-term economic gains exist, but they are usually smaller than the pre-tournament hype suggests. Second, there is infrastructure. This is where World Cups get expensive fast. Hosting often means stadium construction, stadium renovation, airport expansion, roadwork, rail upgrades, telecom improvements, fan zones, security systems, and all the invisible plumbing required to move millions of people without melting down on live television. The upside is obvious. If those upgrades are smart, useful, and needed anyway, the tournament can accelerate projects that improve a country long after the final whistle. Better airports are still better airports. Better transit is still better transit. Better public spaces still matter. But infrastructure is also where World Cups can go financially sideways. Build a stadium that nobody needs, and congratulations, you've created a very expensive monument to bad planning. That's the famous white elephant problem. Research on mega events shows that new stadiums can create long-term benefits in countries and cities where local clubs, future events, and surrounding business districts keep them active. But in places where post-tournament demand is weak, those same stadiums can become ongoing maintenance costs with very little return. That difference matters a lot when comparing 2026 to some earlier tournaments. And this is where 2026 starts to look genuinely different. North America already has most of the stadiums, airports, highways, hotel capacity, and sports event infrastructure it needs. This is not Qatar building on a huge scale from scratch. And it is not the same kind of stadium-heavy gamble seen in some earlier hosts. Most 2026 venues are existing major stadiums, many of them used by NFL, MLS, or CFL teams. Toronto's BMO Field is being expanded for the tournament, and several venues will need surface adjustments, including replacing artificial turf with grass under FIFA's requirements. But the overall model is much more about adaptation than reinvention. Economically, that matters. It lowers capital risk, it reduces the odds of giant white elephants, and it makes the tournament look less like a moonshot and more like a giant, complicated, continental retrofit. Third, there is the branding effect, or to say it less academically, the World Cup as a global advertisement. This may be the most underrated part of the economics. Billions of people watch the World Cup. That means the host country gets a month-long chance to project an image of itself to the world. Modern, fun, safe, efficient, welcoming, culturally alive. That matters, because a World Cup is not just a sporting event, it's also a giant reputational broadcast. Research on mega events argues that one of the most meaningful long-term effects can be improved international perception, which can help attract future tourism, investment, and trade. There is also something economists sometimes call the feel-good effect, the lift in mood, pride, and confidence among citizens. That sounds fluffy, but it can translate into real consumer behavior and even a sense of momentum. And 2026 is practically built for this kind of branding. The US gets to sell scale and spectacle. Canada gets to present itself as an emerging football nation with a fresh audience and first-time host energy. Mexico gets to lean into heritage, passion, and the mythology of places like Estadio Azteca. In a weirdly perfect way, the three hosts complement each other. America offers commercial power, Canada offers novelty, Mexico offers football soul. If FIFA were designing a marketing campaign rather than a tournament, it could hardly ask for a better trio. Fourth, there is the bill, and the bill is never just the stadium bill. Security, policing, crowd management, transport operations, emergency services, local staffing, fan festivals, public cleanup, insurance, and all the extra public administration around the event can be enormous. Some of those costs are easy to miss because they are spread across city budgets, regional agencies, and special committees. And in 2026, the structure is especially unusual in the United States. Rather than one fully centralized national organizing model, US, host cities have largely created their own host committees, which means a lot of financial and legal responsibilities land locally, especially for transportation, public safety, infrastructure coordination, and fan operations. That can make the tournament more flexible, but it also means some cities feel the cost pressure very directly. So when people say the World Cup is coming to the US, what they often really mean is a dozen local governments are about to discover how expensive global prestige can be. Fifth, there's the question that cuts through all the hype. Does hosting the World Cup make economic sense in the long run? The honest answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no, and usually it depends on what you count. If you only look for a quick GDP sugar rush, the results are often underwhelming. If you look at long-term gains in national image, tourism visibility, civic pride, and useful infrastructure, the case gets stronger. But the World Cup is not a guaranteed jackpot. It's closer to a national investment portfolio. Some assets pay off, some don't, and the outcome depends heavily on whether the host was disciplined or delusional. Now let's get to the second big question. What is different about 2026 because three countries are hosting it together? Difference number one. The burden is shared. This may be the single biggest economic difference. A solo host has to do everything: the stadiums, the travel network, the security architecture, the political coordination, the hotel surge, the legacy plan. A tri-host arrangement spreads that pressure out. Canada, the US, and Mexico are not each building a full World Cup machine from zero. They are each supplying part of a larger system. That makes the tournament less financially crushing for any one nation. It also makes it more politically sellable because each government can argue that it gets global exposure without carrying the entire load. Difference number two, the gains will not be shared equally. This is important. This is not a perfectly even three-way split. The United States will host the majority of matches, including everything from the quarterfinal stage onward, which means it also captures the largest share of direct visitor flows, media attention, sponsor activation, and event-related spending. Mexico and Canada absolutely benefit, but they benefit differently. Mexico gets symbolic power, football heritage, and a major tourism spotlight. Canada gets a breakthrough moment and a chance to grow the sport domestically on a bigger stage than ever before. But if we are talking pure scale of economic upside, the US is the heavyweight in this arrangement. Difference number 3. Logistics become a bigger part of the story. A single-country World Cup is hard enough. A 3-country World Cup means border crossings, visa systems, customs rules, multiple security structures, multiple transport systems, different currencies, different tax rules, and enormous travel distances. Even with host cities grouped into Western, Central, and Eastern regions to make scheduling more manageable, this is still a tournament that could send fans from Mexico City to Toronto to Los Angeles to New Jersey. That creates extra business for airlines, hospitality, and travel platforms, which is good. But it also raises friction, costs, and complexity, which is not always so good. Economically, 2026 is more efficient on construction, but less simple on operations. Difference number 4. This World Cup is simply bigger. 48 teams, 104 matches, 39 days. That means more inventory to sell, more tickets, more hotel nights, more sponsor exposure, more broadcasting value, and more cities getting their moment. It also means more travel, more staffing, more coordination, and more strain on systems. Bigger creates opportunity, but bigger also multiplies mistakes. A small miscalculation in a 6-4 match tournament is annoying. A small miscalculation in a 1-0-4 match tournament becomes a continent-sized headache. Difference number 5. The tournament may be more economically rational than many past World Cups, but less emotionally coherent. Let me explain. From a finance perspective, using existing North American venues and sharing the hosting burden across 3 countries is probably smarter than forcing one nation to build an entire football universe alone. But from a cultural perspective, 3 hosts make the event less centered. There is no single national, this is our World Cup narrative in the old school sense. Instead, 2026 feels more like a North American festival. Huge, mobile, multi-brand, cross-border, and very modern. That may be excellent business. It's just a different vibe from, say, Germany 2026 or South Africa 2010. So what's the final verdict? Here it is. The World Cup affects a country's economy in 5 main ways. 1. It creates a short-term spending surge. 2. It can accelerate infrastructure upgrades. 3. It gives the country a giant global branding opportunity. 4. It creates serious public costs and operational risk. And 5. Its true success depends on what lasts after the tournament ends. The event is not a magic ATM. It is a temporary shock to tourism, a public policy stress test, and a global image campaign all at once. And 2026 changes the formula in a very specific way. Instead of asking one country to take all the risk and chase all the reward, it spreads the tournament across 3 hosts, leans on existing infrastructure, and turns the World Cup into something more like a continental platform than a national gamble. That makes it less reckless than some earlier editions. It probably lowers the risk of disaster. It almost certainly lowers the need for wasteful new construction. But it also makes the benefits more uneven, the logistics more complex, and the story less about one host nation and more about one enormous region. In other words, 2026 may be the most economically sensible World Cup model we've seen in a long time, not because it promises the biggest miracle, but because it avoids some of the biggest mistakes. And maybe that is the real lesson of World Cup economics. The smartest host is not the one that dreams the biggest. It's the one that builds the least it doesn't need, spends the most carefully, and understands that the final score is not just measured in goals, but in what the country is left with when the fans go home.